They refused to patch her up, muttering she wasn't worth using precious med supplies on, insisting the real soldiers needed the attention, that she could wait, that she'd probably bleed out anyway. So they left her torn open and barely conscious, slumped behind an armored truck as the last chopper lifted off and abandoned her in the dust. What they didn't realize, what would freeze every medic hours later when her voice cut through the radio, was that the woman they'd written off was actually a Navy SEAL. She didn't just live through it. She pulled herself together, stitched her own wounds, finished the mission on her own, and ended up saving the same convoy that had walked away from her. But before we jump into how she carved a path through a kill zone and reclaimed the mission they tossed aside, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit like, subscribe, ring the bell, and stay sharp. Because here on Major Tom's Tales, this is what happens when you underestimate the wrong soldier. Dawn hadn't even broken when the corridor erupted like the mouth of hell. The so-called cleared NATO lane, Sector Bravo 4, had turned into a graveyard of shredded metal, flipped troop carriers, and buried screams under dirt and shrapnel. The air hung heavy with crushed stone, burning oil, and rising panic. Mortars drifted down in echoing arcs that made every heartbeat stumble. Radios spat static in a dozen languages, but none delivered the one thing anyone wanted to hear: that help was actually coming. Petty Officer First Class. Riley Maddox stumbled down the slope, blood running freely from her side. A jagged shard of metal had ripped through her lower abdomen and thigh, forcing her left leg to drag while her right arm clung desperately to the limp body of Private Leon Hart, whom she'd hauled from a burning striker 20 meters up the ridge. She never checked his name tape. There hadn't been a second to spare. Ahead, the triage zone was pure chaos, stretchers scattered across canvas tarps, medics sprinting between bodies, relying on gut instinct instead of protocol because there was no time for anything else. As Riley staggered toward them, boots slipping in ash, 2 medics peeled away and ran to her, not to help her, but to rip the private off her shoulders and rush him to a stretcher without even meeting her eyes. She stood there swaying, her camo blouse soaked through, breath ragged. One medic glanced back. "She's standing." "Not critical," another muttered. A third barked, "We can't waste supplies on every injured woman who tags along. Move her out of the lane. Real fighters need treatment." No one bothered to ask her name. No one noticed the battered trauma kit on her belt. No one saw the gold trident patch smeared under layers of mud and blood. They saw a bleeding woman and assumed she didn't belong. Riley tried to speak, but the words jammed in her throat as her knees buckled. She collapsed beside a blown-out Humvee, hands pressed to her stomach, vision tunneling. The medics had already turned away. Dust rolled over her as a Blackhawk thundered skyward. Not one person looked back. On the ground beside her, a dog tag slipped free and caught the morning light, the thin chain dragging across her chest. The blood cleared just enough to reveal an old, faint trident scar inked above her heart, a mark none of them had bothered to see. And by then, there was no one left to notice. The gravel scraped deep into her shoulder as she rolled onto her side, squinting through the harsh glow of a smoke-stained sunrise. Her fingers clawed at the dirt on instinct, hunting for anything solid she could use to pull herself forward. Each tiny movement sent a burning wave through her body, blurring the edges of her sight. Somehow, she got one knee under her, then the other. Her abdomen roared in protest, blood throbbing beneath the pressure of her elbow, yet she kept crawling. The triage zone loomed only 30 feet away. She barely managed 10. Boots landed in front of her face. "Ma'am," a sharp voice snapped, "you can't be here." She lifted her head. A young army medic, 20 at best, stared down at her like she was nothing but an obstacle, which to him she probably was. She tried to answer but only coughed, the taste of iron filling her mouth. "You're conscious," he said flatly. "That means you're not priority." She tried again. But another medic cut her off before she could finish. "She's not critical, she's talking." He waved impatiently. "Clear the evac lane. Move her behind the vehicle. We've got incoming litters." She rasped. "Yeah," the younger medic muttered. "We all need something." Together, they half-dragged, half-rolled Riley Maddox behind the charred shell of an MRAP and left her in the dirt. She tried to call out, but her voice disintegrated into nothing. They were already gone. She lay there, watching shadows of boots and stretchers pass like waves. A colonel barked orders. A Marine shouted for more tourniquets. Gunfire crackled somewhere across the valley. Short bursts, controlled, then silence. Riley forced herself upright. Her blouse clung to her side. She peeled it back just enough to see fresh blood pooling. The field dressing she'd pressed in earlier had failed. She needed another tourniquet, fluids, antibiotics, anything to stay conscious for more than an hour. From the other side of the MRAP, she heard Captain Holt Renner's voice. "Save the good kits for the guys who'll actually get back in the fight." Another voice echoed, "Copy that. She'll probably black out soon anyway." Riley leaned her head against the warm metal. Dust from the next helicopter's rotor wash drifted over her in a gray sheet. Stretchers loaded, screams faded, and then the final helicopter lifted off into the haze and disappeared. Everyone but her was gone. Silence hit like a second explosion. No footsteps, no shouting, no radios, just the quiet drip of her own blood onto stone. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'm not done." The stillness didn't last. Artillery rumbled distantly, a slow thunder rolling across the ridge, shaking loose thin avalanches of dust from the MRAP beside her. Riley blinked hard, trying to force her eyes to focus again. Maybe an hour of clarity left, less if the bleeding didn't slow. There would be no medics, no evac, no backup. So she did what a SEAL does when no one else comes. She treated herself. With a strained grunt, she pushed up onto her elbows and scanned the kill zone. Smoke drifted over abandoned gear, ripped open packs, and the dark shapes of vehicles roasted by the first mortar hits. 10 feet away, half buried in debris, she spotted a green medical ruck. She dragged herself toward it on her forearms, teeth clenched, legs screaming every time they brushed the ground. When she finally reached it and yanked it open, she let out a shaky breath. Quick clot, a tourniquet, airway kit, IV bags. Not much, but enough. Her hands trembled as she unbuttoned her blouse and peeled back the blood-soaked fabric. The wound was brutal, shrapnel wedged deep beside her navel, the flesh around it slick and pulsing. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She dug a metal pry tool from the torn frame of the ruck and held it over a patch of burning debris until the metal glowed a dull red. Jaw clenched, breath trapped in her chest, she pressed the heated edge beside the wound and used her free hand to pry the shrapnel loose. Pain detonated behind her eyes like a flashbang. She bit down on her sleeve and screamed into the dirt, desperate not to pass out. The fragment slid free in a dark ribbon of blood. She tossed it aside, grabbed the quick clot, and packed the wound with the rough confidence that came from too many tours. Her fingers were slick, her breathing uneven, but she didn't slow. Next came the tourniquet, tightened high on her thigh to choke off the secondary bleed. She hissed as it locked in place. Then she ripped open an IV bag with her teeth, jabbed the needle into her own arm, and secured it with hands that kept trying to go numb. Only when the drip finally started did she let her head rest against the earth for 30 seconds, long enough to notice fresh blood streaking across her dog tags again, cutting through the faint carved trident scar on her chest. The mark no medic had seen, the mark no enemy should. A cold pressure, not rage, not despair, began to settle beneath her ribs. Not because she was injured, not because she'd been left behind, but because someone had decided she wasn't worth the effort to save. That was their mistake. A branch snapped in the tree line. Footsteps followed. Low voices, not English. Riley Maddox wiped her hand across her chest, gripped her sidearm with steadier fingers than she expected, and drew a slow breath. They were close, and she had no intention of dying here. She stayed still, one eye half closed, breaths shallow, pistol tucked tight against her thigh so the metal wouldn't catch the light. Through the narrow gap beneath the M-wrap, she counted 3 sets of boots. Light steps, deliberate, spaced too perfectly for scavengers. Professionals. They were sweeping for survivors, or bodies. One stopped barely 10 feet away, murmuring something she didn't understand, but the tone said everything. Calm, curious, certain. The kind of voice people use when they think the fight's already over. Riley exhaled once and slid into the wreck's shadow. Moving fast, she snatched up a shattered side mirror and used it to check the angle around the rear tire. 2 men visible, one crouched over a torn ruck, the other wandering with a cigarette, rifle hanging lazily as he approached a fallen soldier. The third was missing from view. She scanned again. There, near the hood, drifting toward the triage tarps. Alone. That was her opening. She slipped around the rear axle, boots silent in the dust, fingers locked tight around the pistol. Her abdomen screamed with every step, but she pushed the pain into focus instead of away. 20 feet, 15. He turned, too late. She slammed into him low, shoulder driving into his gut, blade slicing into the side of his neck as they tumbled behind a supply crate. He tried to cry out, but it came out as a wet choke. She covered his mouth, drove the knife deeper. 1 down. She snatched his rifle and pivoted, just as the second man shouted. He was too far for a precise shot, but not too far to hit. Riley fired once. Center mass. He collapsed, weapon clattering beside him. The third shouted into his radio and bolted. She fired again, missed, swore under her breath, and lowered the rifle. Not worth chasing. Not yet. Instead, she limped to the bodies and stripped them quickly. Extra mags, field rations, a short-range encrypted radio, 1 recon drone still sealed in its pouch. No maps, no tags, no insignias. Contractors. She paused when she saw the patch on one vest, Cerberus Solutions. She froze, recognizing the name instantly. Not the friendly sort. Private military. The kind hired when a job needs to disappear along with the people in it. No accountability, known for taking under-the-table cleanup jobs in war zones too murky for headlines. And if Cerberus Solutions was operating here, it meant someone had hired them for exactly what they were doing, erasing anyone left breathing. Riley clicked the radio to scan, catching a voice mid-report. Confirmed 2 KIA, female target unaccounted for. A pause. They missed one, the woman still alive. She shut the radio off. They knew she existed, but now she knew they weren't locals, weren't militia, weren't some chaotic threat stumbling into the fight. They were contractors, paid hunters, and she wasn't a survivor to them. She was a loose end. She started uphill. No dramatic rise from the ashes, no triumphant music. Just one blood-slick boot pushing into soft soil. Then the other, her weight balanced on her good leg, while a splintered rifle stock served as her crutch. Every step had to be earned. Every breath had to be chosen. The ridge above the kill zone rose like a busted spine. Pine needles, jagged shale, broken shelves of rock, all designed to slow a human down. Riley climbed it anyway. The drone she'd taken, palm-sized, short-range, nothing special, buzzed awake in her hand as she reached the top of the rise. She launched it low and sent it forward. The thermal feed flickered with static, but it still showed her what she needed. A 6-man Cerberus team sweeping behind her in a tight, disciplined line. 4 rifles, 2 scanners, all of them searching for one corpse that should have bled out. Hers. And they weren't the only movement in the valley. To the east, she spotted the tail end of the NATO convoy. The same medics who'd written her off. The same officers who hadn't even asked her name. Their Humvees crawled forward, rerouting around shattered ground from earlier shelling, blindly drifting toward a narrow corridor Riley recognized from satellite briefings. It wasn't marked on the new maps, which meant no one had told them it had been remapped as a minefield. They were rolling straight into a buried belt of explosives the size of a football field. Her first instinct was sharp and cold. Let them walk into it. They'd left her to die without a second thought. But then she pictured Private Leon Hart, the kid she'd dragged from the burning Striker. Helmet too big, arm slung over her shoulder, stunned and barely conscious when the medics pulled him off like discarded gear. He was in that convoy. And if he hit that mine belt, he wasn't getting a second miracle. Her jaw tightened. Riley veered off the ridge, following the thin deer path she'd mapped earlier. Every 100 meters she had to stop, inject morphine, reapply pressure, keep herself from sliding into unconsciousness. Yet she pushed on, descending toward a rocky crag with a clean view across the valley. Beneath the broken oak canopy, she spotted the mortar crews, contractors coordinating by faint flashlight signals. The glint of scopes, the metallic clink of shells being armed. If she didn't stop them, they'd pin the convoy in place right as it crossed the mine belt. No one would survive that. She clenched her teeth, pulled her last stolen explosives free, and began planning something they'd never expect from a bleeding woman they assumed was already dead. She wasn't here to survive. She was here to finish what her team had started. The ridge smelled of diesel fumes and pine. Dry twigs cracked somewhere beyond the bluff, but Riley didn't flinch. She lay flat on a shale ledge, stomach pressed to stone, eyes locked on the mortar crews below. 4 teams spread evenly across a narrow shelf in the valley wall, calm, practiced, methodical. She zoomed the drone in. Each team was synchronized. 2 men on tubes, 1 on spotting duty, another relaying coordinates through a headset. No insignias, contractor-grade gear, everything stripped clean, not militia, a job. Which meant someone had paid for the convoy to be hit from both ends. Riley exhaled slowly and pulled the stolen radio from her vest. She switched to the Cerberus channel, matching the tone and cadence she'd heard earlier. Mortar 3, reposition south. Firewatch request from Ridge Point. A beat, then a clipped. Copy, moving. She repeated the command for 2 more crews with slight changes. And just like that, she watched them split, shuffle, realign, exactly where she needed them out of position. Thin them out, scatter them, and hit what's left. That was the idea. Riley reached into the bottom of the field pack and pulled out a cracked plastic jug of synthetic fuel, along with a flare canister someone had dropped in the chaos. She tore her last field dressing into strips, soaked them in fuel, and wrapped them around a discarded tire lying near the blast crater. With a grunt, she wedged a piece of bent steel beneath one side to angle it just right. The ridge sloped sharply behind it. She lit the improvised torch and shoved it hard. The tire tumbled downhill like some flaming demon wheel, shrieking across the rocks before slamming straight into the contractor's fuel drums. The explosion hit the mountainside like a thunderclap. A burst of orange swallowed the nearest crew. Men scattered, shouting in panic. 2 desperately tried to salvage the munitions. 1 sprinted into the tree line, only to step on a mine Riley had marked earlier with a stack of stones. The second blast was smaller, sharper, final. She didn't linger. Riley slid down the opposite slope, angling east, snatching up the drone controller mid-movement. The screen flickered, showing the aftermath. 1 crewman wounded, 2 fleeing outright, another frozen in place, shouting frantic calls that no one was answering. She tucked herself into a narrow crevice and keyed into the Cerberus network again, her voice flat and impersonally calm. Grid 5. Bravo compromised. Possible friendly fire incident. All crews initiate fallback. She didn't need them to listen, just to hesitate. Confusion was the weapon. Then she swept the forest floor with the drone feed and saw what she'd prayed she wouldn't. The NATO convoy was creeping forward again, drifting off their intended path, rolling straight toward the old mine corridor, her eyes locked on the lead Humvee. She knew that number stenciled on the hood. It was the vehicle they'd loaded Private Leon Hart into. Her jaw tightened. Mission first, always. And now, that mission meant making sure those men didn't die just because she'd been abandoned. She raised the radio slowly, not speaking at first. Below her, the convoy was grinding to a halt. 6 Humvees and 2 troop carriers spread out along the tightest bend in the valley. Engines idled, tires worked into soft earth, and several soldiers had stepped out, waving maps, confused and unaware they were already standing in danger. The mine belt had been unmarked for years. The freshest maps, the ones Captain Holt Renner was clutching right now, showed a clean, safe corridor. But locals knew better. Insurgents knew better. And Riley had seen it firsthand 4 days earlier while running recon. Old skull and crossbone signs buried under rockfall. Faded warning flags stuffed into a pile of logs. She switched to the command-level frequency she'd taken from the contractors, her voice rough but solid. Convoy Bravo 2, halt movement. You're in a live minefield. Repeat, stop all forward movement immediately. A pause, static. Then, unverified transmission, identify yourself. Maddox, Petty Officer First Class, SEAL Team 4, clearance code Echo Zulu 6. Another stretch of silence, long enough to make her wonder if they'd cut the line. Then a voice she recognized, older, uneasy. Captain Renner. Is this the woman we left behind? She didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, and I'm the only one who can walk you out of this alive. Muffled conversation followed. Someone had covered the mic. She could practically hear the disbelief, the scrambling excuses, the quiet panic as every officer realized what they'd done. Renner finally returned, cautious. You're injured. We were told you didn't make it. You didn't ask, she shot back. Now listen. Still no confirmation, so she gave them something they couldn't ignore. Lead vehicle, stop. Your front left tire is 6 inches from a directional anti-personnel mine. Rear axles are sitting in soft soil. Don't shift weight or you'll activate the pressure plate. That froze them. Another medic jumped onto the line, voice tight and disbelieving. How the hell would you even know that? Because I mapped the grid 8 days ago, she replied, and I'm watching your movement on drone feed right now. The channel went silent, completely still. She could picture helmets snapping toward screens, radios being shoved between hands, everyone realizing simultaneously they were alive only because the woman they'd left for dead was still breathing. And then came the moment everything shifted. A younger medic, breath shaky, voice almost afraid. Sir, I've got helmet cam footage from the private she carried out. You need to see this. A click. Muffled audio. Then a quiet, horrified, oh, God. Another medic whispered, look at her chest, that scar, the ink, sir, That's not medical." A beat of stunned silence followed. "She's got the trident. She's a SEAL." The channel went reverent, dead still. Riley didn't wait for apologies. "Move the lead vehicle 2 meters left and follow my markers exactly. No deviations." No one argued, not even Captain Holt Renner. Step by step, she guided them through the mine belt, reciting coordinates only someone with EOD training could store under fire. And through all of it, she kept one eye locked on the ridge. Because while the medics were realizing who she was, the enemy had already pinpointed her. The first shot cracked through the air before she even had time to breathe. It hissed past her shoulder and chewed into the dirt inches from the drone controller. She didn't flinch. She'd been expecting company. Riley dropped low, swept her gear into a ditch, and crawled back toward the rocky outcrop she'd chosen hours earlier. A natural fortress. High angle, narrow entry, unforgiving terrain. She'd rigged it with whatever scraps she had. A tripwire stripped from a contractor's vest, 2 audio baits tied to her last smoke canisters, and a pattern of loose rocks she'd memorized like pressure triggers. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Pressed against the ridge wall, she listened. Boots climbing, voices half-whispered, half-shouted. 4, maybe 5 sets. No spacing now. They were rushing her, hoping to overwhelm a wounded woman before she could dig in. Riley almost smiled. She was already dug in. The tripwire snapped. Smoke burst from the lower slope, rolling thick and white as the wind pushed it downhill. Exactly what she wanted. From below, it would look like she was falling back, abandoning her cover. Someone shouted, "She's retreating!" 2 silhouettes broke through the lower pines. She counted their steps. 1, 2, 3, pop. The flashbang she'd rigged behind a rock detonated. One man stumbled, dazed. She dropped him with a clean round to the chest. His partner turned, too slow. She was already rolling left, slipping behind boulders, circling to flank them. The third contractor came from above, trying a clever high crawl. But she'd prepared for that too, a noise mine hidden under a gravel lip. He triggered it. The blast wasn't lethal, but the concussion stunned him, and that was all she needed. 1 shot, down. She reloaded, 2 mags left. Her fingers moved from memory, her ears sifting the smoke for the softest shift of stone. She advanced again, slower now, one leg dragging blood. She couldn't sprint, couldn't vault cover, but she didn't have to. They still believed she was running. They didn't realize she was guiding them. A panicked voice cut through the open convoy channel. Captain Renner. "Maddox, we hear gunfire. Are you under attack? Do you need support?" She keyed the mic instantly. "No, you won't reach me in time." "Tell us your position. We can reroute a fire team." Her reply stayed calm, level. "I said no. You've got wounded. Protect them. I'll hold the ridge." Another voice chimed in, a younger medic, Doc Avery, trembling. "Ma'am, you'll die up there." Riley steadied her rifle, sighting the 4th target as he crept from the left, weapon raised. Then I'll die on my feet. 1 crisp shot. Target down. She exhaled. 1 magazine left. No more tricks, no more distractions. The valley went quiet again, not the comforting kind, but the kind that warned her something smarter, more patient was closing in. Smoke drifted like pale fog across the rocks. Spent shell casings glittered in the dust. Her palms were slippery with sweat and dried blood, but her grip stayed firm. 1 mag, 5 rounds. Enough. If she used each one wisely, it would have to be enough. Then she heard it. 1 set of footsteps, deliberate and steady, crunching over stone just off her flank. No rushed breathing, no chatter, no nerves. Someone alone, someone trained. Someone who didn't fear what they'd find. Riley stayed low, shifted her sightline, and waited. A voice floated in from just beyond the ledge, calm, almost casual. "Petty Officer Maddox, I was told you were a problem." She didn't answer. Looks like that was an understatement. She caught a glimpse. Black boots, clean tactical pants, knee guards, gloves. The man stepped fully into view, rifle lowered but unmistakably ready. No insignia. Face lined, jaw tight, shaved clean. Too calm for someone walking into a ridge littered with his own dead. "You're not militia," she said flatly. He gave a crooked smirk. "Neither are you." They circled each other in a slow half-moon, dust swirling between them. Riley's muscles screamed with every adjustment of her stance, but she forced her breathing into a steady rhythm. "Cerberus?" she asked. He shrugged. "Not anymore. Private contractor. Clients you'd never get clearance for." "Who sold our convoy route?" He tilted his head, amused. "Does it matter?" Riley didn't bother arguing. She dropped her empty sidearm and brought the rifle up with both hands. He twitched. She fired. The round slammed into his vest, knocking him back, but not down. He recovered too fast. A heartbeat later, he was on her. They hit the ground brutally, her ribs lighting up in agony as her back cracked against the rock. His elbow drove toward her throat. She blocked with her forearm and reached instinctively for her knife, but he slapped it away. They grappled close, filthy, violent. Two people who knew exactly how to kill and how to survive by fractions. He forced his weight down, trying to crush her windpipe against the ridge wall. She let him, for just long enough to get her legs into position. Then she twisted, rolled hard, and sent them both tumbling through the gravel. He hit the bottom first. She landed on top, a rock already in her hand. The first blow cracked against his temple. The second finished it. For a moment, she just knelt there, hand trembling, chest rising and falling fast. Then she leaned in, checked for a pulse, and pulled a small encrypted drive from a pouch hidden beneath his vest. Names, coordinates, payments, proof. And the last thing he'd said before trying to choke her out echoed in her mind. "Your convoy was never supposed to make it out." Riley stared at him once more, then keyed her mic. "I'm coming down," she muttered, voice raw. "Prepare for wounded." The descent felt twice as long as the climb. Her legs barely held her weight. Blood seeped warm through her bandage again. The rifle dragged at her shoulder. The encrypted drive dug into her palm like it wanted to cut through. She didn't radio ahead again, no warnings, no instructions. They saw her before she reached the clearing. The convoy had regrouped near a burned-out barn, perimeter weak but holding. Stretchers lined the far edge. Medics huddled in twos and threes, whispering into radios, faces pale and drawn. Then one soldier pointed. "She's coming down." Boots turned. Weapons lowered. Riley stepped into the open, smeared in blood, coated in dust, one eye nearly swollen shut, vest torn wide. The trident scar across her chest was visible now. Impossible to miss. Nobody overlooked it this time. The same logistics captain who'd brushed her off earlier, Captain Holt Renner, took a slow step forward, helmet dangling from his hand. "Maddox," his voice cracked. "We didn't know. We should have." She cut him off before he could build the sentence. "You didn't ask." He lowered his eyes and gave a single nod. No excuses, no defense. A medic approached with a stretcher, but she stopped him with a look. "I'm standing. Give that to someone who isn't." Without another word, she moved past them and headed straight for Private Leon Hart, the kid she'd dragged from the burning striker hours earlier. He lay on his side, arm in a sling, chest wrapped tight, but awake, wide-eyed and breathing. When she knelt beside him, he blinked in disbelief. "You made it," he whispered. "Yeah," she breathed back. you did too. That was all that needed saying. Behind her, the low thump of rotor blades began to swell. Quick reaction force inbound. Boots pounded across the clearing as fresh officers in spotless gear flooded the perimeter, firing off questions about sit reps, casualties, and who had cleared the ridge. A medic answered before anyone else could point fingers. She did, alone. Riley turned away from the commotion, walked to the back of a Humvee, and eased herself onto the tailgate, finally letting her body slow down, finally letting the pain catch up, but still refusing to collapse. When the QRF commander approached and offered her water, she didn't take it. Instead, she pressed the encrypted drive into his hand. Names, payments, the kill order chain, someone sold our route. It's all on there. He stared at the drive like it might burn through his glove, then pocketed it silently. The helicopters descended with dust and force, and more noise than she could think through. They tried to load her first. She waved them aside. One of the final stretchers carried a corporal missing half a foot. Riley helped lift him into the bird. Only then did she climb aboard, gripping the rail with a blood-smeared hand. As the helicopter rose, she didn't look back. She lived by one rule she never broke. Leave no one behind, even if they tried to leave her. Would you have kept fighting if everyone abandoned you? Did the medics fail Riley? Or were they simply following protocol? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that the most dangerous person on the field is the one you underestimated, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next here on Major Tom's Tales. Share this mission with someone who still believes in second chances. And if you're not heading out yet, stick around. Another story is already waiting on your screen, and I'll be